All right, can you hear me? Okay. Mm. Okay. POIs in chat, please. So quickly on what we're going to use our fiat to do. This is going to look like fines or general sanctions on firms who don't comply with putting their AI models into open source networks. I think that's quite reasonable. It's not going to be enough to completely destroy these companies, but it's enough to severely, put them behind and serve as a big incentive to make sure that they comply. The first thing I want to talk about is um, why bad actors are not going to suddenly be able to misuse this technology for, nefarious purposes. Why is that the case? I think firstly is that these bad actors can already use this type of technology. It's out there. We know it's out there. So you can, for example, use ChatGPT API, but also we've already seen these massive stories of, deep fake AI pornography coming out. We've seen the stories of how China has their own models used for Face ID recognition, so on and so forth. This technology is already being used by nefarious actors. They already have been pushing towards this. They have an incentive to build their own models for these purposes. So it's unlikely that this tips the scale in any meaningful way, especially when we're talking about the worst of the worst, the people with the most resources to do bad. Secondly, is that it's very hard to reverse engineer these types of machines. Why is this the case? AI and machine learning models are opaque. This is a black box we're talking about. I want to note that firstly, the average voter knows this because this has been headlines for years and years and years. Secondly, that this is why problems like aligning AI exist. We aren't able to fully understand what inputs are leading to what outputs. And thirdly, it's because you can you can train your model on a lot of data, but this, what comes out isn't really continuous with that. So we don't know why ChatGPT, for example, is always saying delve or like other weird types of idiosyncrasies of each model. It's unclear to us, which means that yes, you do have access to the code. Yes, you're able to copy and paste or do whatever you want with it, but it does not mean that some random individual can go in and like edit a line of code and then suddenly ChatGPT is going to let people make bombs with it, right? We don't know what line of code, makes for that. It's been trained over years and years and years with different sets of data. And this is something that is very difficult for even, open AI to change. I think thirdly is that even if you don't buy the stuff about bad actors already having access to these types of technologies, I think that notably they could build their own if they really want to. Again, the worst actors with the most resources are going to have ability to do that, and we're not going to be, changing the playing field by giving them access to this type of code. Why is this a good thing? Firstly, on how the perception of openness requires more safety efforts and will lead to a lot more safety and push for safety and ethics going into these companies. Firstly, on why it's not already the case that these companies are investing huge amounts of money into safety. I want to note that, yes, they are. They are putting a decent amount of money into safety and ethics. But the problem here is that safety and ethics are often sidelined. It's not the PhD, AI developers who are working on the ethics teams. It's often sidelined or seen as a peripheral priority. It's seen as something where you have to follow the rules. You have to follow what the regulators are saying. And it's not really treated with the same respect often in society as, the hard innovation is. You often see, the people with, the cold-nosed researchers, who care mostly about developing the AI. These are the people who are leading the corporation. These are the people who have the highest positions in the corporation. And it's unlikely that they're going to take really full direct commands from, a peripheral safety or ethics department. So why do you get more? Firstly, on public pressure, right? So at the point that you do open this up, there's now more fear and more public pressure about stopping this from entering the hands of evil people. I've already explained why it's unlikely that this is actually going to be really material, but it's very perceptually difficult to come to terms with that. It's very hard to deal with that. And so just to stop any of that bad press, to stop people from, lambasting your company and investors refusing to work with you, you really want to push more into that safety department. You have regulators who want to, be seen as tough on China or tough on, this weird technology that's coming out. They want to be seen as putting these regulations and making sure that these companies are falling in line. Secondly, then, on transparency, at the point that you can see these models, you have access to these models, it doesn't mean that you can change these models willy-nilly to do what you want with them, but it does mean that regulators or independent journalists or universities have much more access to be able to test these models, to be able to independently verify that these safety checks are taking place, to independently verify that the proper type of training around safety and ethics is taking place. And this just means that these AI companies have much more exposure to risk when it comes to, making sure that they're actually investing properly into that AI safety, into that AI ethics. I think that is incredibly important at the point that you recognize that there is huge potential harms with the AI race. We want to make sure that all of these companies are following lines when it comes to making sure these AIs, are not gonna just suddenly go rogue and fucking kill all humans. Before I go on, POI.
Is it easy for regulators to understand this? And for the average politician in your country, how will they deal with an open source ChatGPT?
I don't think that it's easy for a politician to understand this, but I do think that it's easy for universities, journalists, the experts who are going to be talking about this at think tanks, push this into the public eye, to do their independent testing and to get this out there. I think politicians don't understand much, but they do respond to what, people are telling them, the experts who they surround themselves with. The second point that I want to bring up is why this is probably good on scale for innovation and research. I note firstly on barriers to entry. Building these types of AI is very difficult, right? To actually get a working AI, you need a lot of capital, you need servers, you need chips, you need a lot of experts working on that AI. You need a lot of data files to actually be able to train the AI for it to sufficiently generate the things that you want to generate. These are resources that smaller researchers for smaller universities, underdeveloped countries, people who want to, work on these projects simply do not have. They cannot develop these models at the same speed that they already exist. They're unable to really access the types of projects that they want to access. What does that mean? It means that researchers who want to translate dying languages are much more able to do that. They have access to these models for them to be able to use and feed their data into it and change it in a way that they can work on their dying language. It means that smaller companies that aren't as established can work on vaccines or protein folding, things that could potentially save lives and push the boundaries of innovation. Even if it's by 1%, that means on scale it grows exponentially. I think that on scale this outweighs any potential bad uses of the AI, because those good people who are using these for good are likely to get subsidies from the government. They don't need to hide in the shadows. They're much more socially accepted. We care about innovation. We care about transparency. For all those reasons, propose.
We thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech, and now to open up the case for opening opposition, we welcome the Leader of Opposition to the floor. Hear, hear.
Right. Same thing, just put POIs in chat. Are we all ready? Okay. Just going to start with a brief framework and then rebut their case and then get into our case. All right, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. All right, just to get into our framework. First, I just wanted to find something that they never did. What actually constitutes a major company under this motion, right? So we would say that what makes something major is that it has a large valuation and then it has a major agency to make an impact, right? So we're not just talking about companies like Google and Facebook. We're also talking about companies like OpenAI and other generative AI startups that have multi-million or multi-billion-dollar valuations that are extremely important to this debate. Secondly, when you want to say what generative AI is, just so this debate gets really clear, right? Generative AI, aptly titled, is AI that can generate things. Text, images, videos. This is really important so we understand the scope of the debate. Crucially, generative AI is also extremely expensive to create, as the Gov points out. So we're not just going to see individual people in their garage making their own Gen AI models. And then thirdly, we want to extremely characterize that this motion, even under the framework of fines being imposed by the government, is predicated on people in government institutions understanding technology, being able to properly regulate it, being able to properly enforce it. We simply do not think, based on the fact that most people in government authorities all across the world, but especially in Western countries, are old and out of touch and don't understand technology, as we can see from the Facebook testimony a few years ago with Mark Zuckerberg, where they asked him basically how to use Facebook. Ultimately, these agencies aren't going to be able to regulate properly. With that out of the way, let's rebut their speech. First, they first get out of the way with preempting the argument that nefarious actors are not going to be the ones getting control of these devices. First, they say that they can already use them. We would contend, first of all, that in the status quo, while they can use things like ChatGPT or they can make their own models, they have these models that exist have so many more guardrails in place to make sure that they're not generating bombs and poisons. However, whenever this legislation or other motion goes into effect, there's no guardrails and they can use them however they want. So it is a unique change. And then they tell you that they can't reverse engineer it and then it's hard to edit it. We would say that, we're not just talking about individual actors, we're talking about terrorist organizations, we're talking about massive government agencies in nefarious countries like the Taliban. They will be able, and organizations like ISIS will have engineers in their ranks that can edit these things. Don't give them any offense on this. Let's move on to their case though. First, they say that the perception of safety goes up because of public pressure and that transparency also makes things safer. So I think these are both predicated on the impact of actually making AI safer, right? So 2 responses here. First, this is completely non-unique. It's going to happen on either side of the house because there's already an incentive for companies to make AI safe. Even increasing transparency and public pressure isn't going to make them want to make AI safer. They already have full incentive to do that because of the economic ramifications of their AI going wrong. But further, we would say that public pressure is already so high in the status quo that argument is also just not even offensive on their side. And then we just want to do some weighing before we get into our point, which is that if you can see this idea of nefarious actors using it for things like terrorism, we would say the impact of the world being less safe is more important than the perception of it being safer. It doesn't matter if we think AI is safer if it's being used for catastrophic things. Okay, so then the best case of their argument then is that we have universities and researchers that make AI marginally safer. The worst case of their argument is that terrorist organizations get their hands on generative AI and use it to create misinformation, bombs, phishing scandals, IP theft, and more. So ultimately, even if we make AI marginally better, that's not going to make as big as an impact on the world on scope and magnitude as letting nefarious actors get into AI. So let's move on to our case. First, we will tell you that it is absolutely certain that nefarious actors will get their hands on AI after this motion goes into effect via open source, and that unique access will massively increase their scope of harm in the status quo. So first, just some quick warning on how making it open source is going to let nefarious actors wreak havoc. So the idea here is really simple. In the status quo, they currently don't understand how to reverse engineer ChatGPT. They don't have the resources to do that. But then, after this motion goes into effect, they'll be able to see all the code that they need to create all of the horrifying impacts that they want to create. So whenever they have open coding, they'll be able to have engineers within their ranks that can edit the code and use it for various purposes. So let's impact this out and to the terminal extent that it needs to be. Firstly, I'll impact it out, then I'll respond. So firstly, things like phishing scandals, identity theft, things that can end your financial career immediately because of AI stealing your password. Then actual terrorist events that kill tens of thousands or millions of people, things like creating a bomb, things like teaching an engineer in another country how to reverse engineer a lethal autonomous weapon. These are the impacts we're talking about in this debate. And then lastly, and most crucially, on this idea of misinformation, you can use AI to create deepfakes of presidents saying things that they didn't say, or people that you don't like saying things that they didn't say. This is going to cause nefarious actors to change the narrative and spread misinformation about things like vaccines. So while Open and Gov tells you that we're going to have so much innovation, none of that matters if people don't even know how to access that innovation in the first place. I'll take a point from closing.
If there's more AI for bad people to do bad things, presumably there's also more AI for security agencies, governments, etc., to prevent those bad things from happening.
I don't think this is true because in the status quo, the comparative is like all the good actors, the American government, American companies are the ones that have control over these AI systems. And most of the bad actors don't have access to these resources. However, what the comparative after you pass the motion is the good actors have lots of AI and the bad actors have lots of AI. So right now in the status quo, the good actors have way more access. That's why it's safer. Okay, so our last argument is then just we're emboldening monopolies after you pass. And the reason is really simple, right? So like companies like OpenAI and other AI startups, they're still up and coming in the market. However, companies like Facebook and Google that don't have access to all their new innovation can just envelop those entire companies and copy all of their innovation and make it more cheap and more accessible. So as a result, because these big companies have more resources in the status quo, they'll be able to envelop smaller companies and ultimately decrease competition. It's really simple, right? What this mechanizes out to, the biggest impact, is anti-competitive practices, like buying out small startups. So whenever we're buying out pharmaceutical companies, whenever we're buying out generative AI startups, the vaccines and innovation that the PM is telling you about never get to happen in the first place because those companies aren't even able to compete. So ultimately, what changes when you pass? Well, all that happens is large companies get access to all the innovation from up-and-coming startups that are still major companies like OpenAI. They copy their idea, innovation goes down, and all the harms on the other side get even worse. They get perpetuated. That's what we're so proud to oppose.
We thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. Please excuse me for 2 seconds while I let my cat in. And then to continue the case for opening government, we welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to the floor. Hear, hear.
Thanks. Just give me 1 second to grab a timer. Can everyone hear me all right? Awesome. I'm going to start off by dealing with some of the op claims. I'm going to reinforce some of what Humam told you and expand on our case a little bit, then do some weighing for you at the end. So first of all, I think a lot of opposition's case is just a lot of fear-mongering. Let's start with the less fear-mongering bit. That's talking about regulation. I think they give you a bit of Joe Biden analysis where they say that politicians are really old and sleepy and they don't understand how technology works. And sure, that might be true. I think that it's pretty clear, though, that politicians aren't the ones that are actually working in regulatory agencies that are making sure that companies abide by every strict regulatory standard. Most governments have offices, already have bureaucracies that deal with large tech companies and are able to regulate them somewhat effectively. I think that the government enjoys sanctions because they make a lot of money off of them. So there's an incentive for politicians to follow through on these. I don't think that regulation is the biggest burden in this debate. So I think that opposition's picks on this are relatively ineffective. Secondly, let's talk about danger then. This is where it gets kind of exciting. I think the biggest question is, so what if ISIS is able to use their own ChatGPT? I don't think having access to open source AI technology is really the tipping point in creating way more terrorism in the world. I think opposition fails to prove this. So what if ISIS is able to develop their own medical imagery diagnostics? I don't think they're able to strongly increase the extent to which they do terrorism or do bad things in the world that opposition claims. I think that's also taking them quite generously and assuming that they're actually going to be able to use this open source technology to create effective AI technologies. There are quite a few barriers between having open source code and actually creating your own AI model. The first is what Humam already tells you, that a lot of AI is a black box. We don't know how exactly it works. So even if you copy the code, the differences in what you input and what you get as an output are not always super reliable. It's going to take a lot of resources before the Taliban, for example, is able to make their own ChatGPT. There's also some more physical barriers to actually running models of this scale. The first is how do you get all the semiconductors you need in order to actually physically run these? How do you get all the servers, all the power you need to power all of these servers that are incredibly energy intensive, that a lot of major companies are able to bankroll for large tech companies that already exist? How does ISIS have the infrastructure to actually accomplish this? Even if they were able to make their own ChatGPT, they wouldn't be able to run it. And finally, even if all of these other barriers weren't a thing, they still don't have the training data in order to actually make this effective. In order for you to say, ChatGPT, tell me how to make a bomb, you have to have training data that actually tell you how to make a bomb. They'd already have to have access to this information. Therefore, the margin of change by which you already have this information versus AI tells you this information which you already have is literally zero. You don't get more terrorism on their side of the house. Phishing, identity scams, deep fakes, all of these already exist and are things that nefarious actors are able to do in the world. There's not a significant uptick on ops side of the house. So there's not really a tipping point in any of their arguments here. Let's then reinforce some of the things that Humam tells you. Tells you why bad actors are unable to significantly increase the margin of harm they cause. But also talks to you a lot about transparency. I think transparency is a really key claim here. The big push that we give you on our side of the house is that AI actually has a lot of really positive impacts for humanity. AI is really good for dealing with productivity and everyday business settings to being a student. AI can be a really helpful tool. It increases a lot of people's quality of life. And it also has a lot of really good practical applications diagnosing medical imagery, for example, at a much more accurate rate than humans are able to diagnose. So AI has a lot of very positive implications for humanity. It's important that we continue to adopt it for two reasons. First of all, when you're actually using AI and using it for these positive outcomes, that's like a pretty utile thing that's good for overall society. But also because of the way that AI works, because the more that it is used, the more that it trains on people using it, the better it improves. When you reach like a critical mass of people using and adopting AI into their everyday life, you increase the quality of which this AI functions. That's also incredibly utile. I'll take a POI from closing if there is one.
Why is ChatGPT not open source right now?
I think ChatGPT isn't open source right now because like why would they be? If you're a private company, you want to like maximize your profit, right? So a lot of private companies don't have incentives to do anything that goes against maximizing their profit or pushing themselves ahead of their competitors. I think even if they're not open source because it's not in their own interest, but it's because it's not in the interest of private corporations does not mean that it's not in the interest of overall society, right? So I think that for overall society, because more people get access to these AIs, it's better, right? So anyways, back to my transparency point. People are hesitant to adopt AI technologies because they are unclear how exactly they work and how exactly they're getting their training data. I think the training data thing is being resolved. There's a couple lawsuits, like the New York Times, for example, is currently suing some companies for scraping off their own data. I think the next point of reducing people's hesitancy with AI is transparency. How does AI actually work? This is going to be improved through open source because you have independent investigators that are able to actually go through the code and tell everyday people how they work. They're able to synthesize that information from an independent perspective that is more trustworthy to the public. Secondly, this also helps more people spot flaws in AI. AI is incredibly complex. Even if these companies are really well versed in their own technology, they don't know everything about how it works. By having more eyes on this open source code, you have more people that are able to spot the flaws that may exist and point out these flaws to the people who are working at these companies in order to improve the way that AI works for everyone. Last point about transparency then, a lot of these companies, because they are private and profit driven, put more resources into the development of their AI than they do into making sure that it's safe. But by competing with other companies, by all large companies being open source, and by competing therefore on the aspect of transparency and safety more openly, companies have a greater incentive to put more resources into their safety of their platform because that is now observable to the everyday consumer. They want to have an edge over their competitors in that regard. So final point then about the nature of innovation. I think that a lot of big tech companies right now have a super big lead in the AI market because of the amount of training data that they have access to. They have a natural advantage and they're able to exploit that and to keep smaller competitors down. That is bad because large companies are more risk adverse because they have more to lose than smaller startups in taking bigger leaps in different types of technologies they want to explore. They're more profit motivated, so less like focused and idealistic on the benefit to all of society. Small investors get a better benefit out of this because they have access to more information through this open source code that gives them a bit of a head start above where they would be like otherwise. So they can then progress at a much faster rate and hopefully get acquired by these larger companies and improve their technology through that way, give them better competitive advantage. So we prove to you why we win on this safety claim and why we concretely impact and improve the lives of everyday people through better long-term development of AI, and AI that is safer, that is more trustworthy, that is more accurate, and that is less likely to fall into the hands of nefarious actors for which there isn't even a huge tipping point anyways. So because we win on safety, because we win on long-term AI development, I'm so proud to propose.
Lastly, we thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech, and to continue the case for opening opposition, we welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Okay. Give me just a moment. Okay. With that, my speech will begin now. I will start off with some things on what they said on our case and then move on to their case. All right, first, they say that they will like the politicians obviously aren't the ones who are individually going to manage the AI companies. They're going to create agencies and bureaus that are full of experts that understand what they're doing. The problem is politicians ultimately control everything about that bureau that actually matters, i.e. its wallets and its who's actually leading it, right? So if we look at like administrations who don't understand, they're going to appoint political appointees, people who like are in favor with that politician that just became president because they donated to his campaign, and they're going to make them leader of this like nice cushy new bureau, right? Even if you don't buy that, they control funding, right? So what happens when we get like a politician? If we all agree that politicians, like as a government agreed, politicians just don't understand AI, right? What happens when a politician who fundamentally just doesn't think AI is a problem or a priority that needs to be analyzed closely gets into the presidential office or like, some senatorial office? They're going to decrease funding to that bureau, right? Okay, so I think that just takes out why like this bureau thing helps at all. Ultimately, like the bureaus, like the politicians who don't understand are going to still matter. Okay, even if you don't buy that. Secondly, they say that they're going to make money off sanctions, and politicians will definitely follow through on sanctions because they love money. But that is the problem. We're going to turn that because that means there's absolutely no nuance in the way that politicians implement this kind of policy. There is no kind of understanding about when it is appropriate to sanction heavily and when it is appropriate to sanction lightly. Because again, they have no understanding. They just want money as a government has characterized, right? So what we're going to see is very heavy sanctions in like inappropriate places and very very little care and understanding for when it might truly be dangerous and we actually need to be sanctioning, because they're not going to hold back dangerous technology when it becomes available and becomes a serious risk to people because of widespread misinformation or racist AI coming out, because they simply just don't understand AI. We both agree on that. Okay, moving on to the response to our first contention. They say that more servers they say that ISIS doesn't have the resources to buy like servers and the semiconductors they need to host AI. That is just simply not true. ISIS has financial resources. They need to buy server. They need to buy all you need to run this AI is like a decent sized building and like money to buy servers, right? The real thing they can't afford is because of brain drain and obviously people who are experts in their field not wanting to join ISIS. The real thing that they can't afford is the true experts that create the cutting edge AI. What they can't afford is base level engineers that are able to use code that is very obviously placed in front of them, not even have to reverse engineer it as they claim, to just create AI that creates a lot of misinformation. They're basically going to create they have the potential to, for example, create and publish to a widespread population around in that region that has ISIS, for example, a search engine that just shows really pro-ISIS information, right? That's something you can't do with ChatGPT because ChatGPT has guardrails. That's something you can do when you can use the base code of ChatGPT to create a thing that is very pro your extremist organization or your authoritarian government, fill in the blank, right? So then they say that so then they say that they need training to create data for bombs on the example of terrorism. I think that is the most extreme example, but we're still going to defend it. But even if you don't buy that, they have a lot of resources on just how to they have a lot of resources now that they can like I said with the search engine that they just didn't have before. It's very different to have a ChatGPT free account than to have your own ChatGPT that you can make biased in exactly the way that supports your authoritarian government's policies, your racial majorities opinions, that kind of thing, or be anti be Islamophobic and publish that in and make that widely available as a search engine in the American South, for example. Okay, so what you're gonna and secondly, okay, on the bomb point though, first, there's a lot of public training resources that is already open source, right? So they can basically use that to create the information they need to do a bomb manual. Even if you don't buy that, there will be an exact bomb manual. The thing that is so powerful about AI is it can summarize a large amount of science into the principles that you need to create a bomb, for example. So this is very beneficial for people that want to create weapons. It's not just bombs. It's finding out where to source illegal firearms and that kind of thing to just strengthen your extremist organization. Thirdly, the reason this doesn't happen now is because ChatGPT has guardrails against anything that could possibly be related to weapons creation. The thing is, when a extremist organization or an authoritarian government gets its hands on the base code, they can take off those guardrails and use it to do whatever they want. Okay. Furthermore, the more important and the biggest impact I think of this whole extremist point is that they can just basically create widespread misinformation. I already talked about creating a custom biased search engine, but another thing they can do is create deep fakes. For example, they can just have Biden come up on stage and say I hate Muslims and I'm declaring war on the Muslim world. You guys should probably be extremists now, right? And this just can't be done on current generative AI models because they have, again, guardrails, safety rails against this kind of thing. That kind of prop would be outright rejected by most image generation, by all current image generation AIs. Okay. So I'll take the POI now from closing.
None of this is unique. Should we stop and suspend all kinds of innovation because bad people could
I think it actually is unique because when it's not open source, the most important thing, which is the base code, which is what like extremist organizations or smaller authoritarian governments cannot replicate on their own, is safe, right? They can still use free ChatGPT, but the power is very limited there. So as my partner already stated, we're keeping it in the hands of like people who are under like democratic regulations, companies in America, companies in like democratic countries. Okay, so they say that, and like okay, on the point that like ChatGPT is like is only closed because like they have incentive for their own profit. This is ignoring the overall economy that AI exists in. So this is a really big argument I'm making here, and which is basically that ChatGPT, as mentioned, as stated by my partner, is though big, the biggest AI company right now, is relatively small against existing non-AI giants like Google, Apple, Microsoft, take your pick, right? So these companies are going to buy out these smaller companies. This is a good thing that small companies will be incentivized to innovate heavily and then get bought out for money, right? But the problem is that companies tend to do monopolistic practices where they just buy out a company, and then because it costs resources like hiring new people to understand this technology and how to implement it, to actually implement all their patents that the small company came with, they just don't use those patents. We see this happening all the time with like pharmaceutical companies, right? They just don't even use those patents, or like with like tech companies buying out smaller tech companies. They don't even use those patents. They don't use the new technology. That never goes to the consumer base. It never benefits anyone because all they're doing is buying out market space. They can have the same amount of profit by being a monopoly for way less resource expenditure because they are now the only option than it would cost them to actually, and it would cost them way more to hire experts to actually understand the new technology they acquired. So basically they buy market space and they don't even use any of the technology. They just have a limited one of their competition and now can succeed as a monopoly. This happens all the time, and we don't want to see this happening in AI because it literally triggers all the bad impacts about like AI just not being developed and not having innovation, right? Okay, and for that reason, I strongly oppose.
Excellent. We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. Let's shake things up a bit and head into the back half. Member of Government, you have the floor.
Cool. I just want to confirm that I'm audible.
You are indeed.
All right. POIs, if you would just unmute yourself, that would be much better because I'm not looking at chat. Without further ado, I will start on my next word. Two major claims from opening opposition. Firstly, is regulation possible? Here they say that governments are old and are unlikely to keep up with the massive advances that AI is making. Two responses to this. One, experts exist to communicate complex topics. So that's to say that even if like you don't have a bunch of AI experts in your regulatory firms, you often have people with communication degrees that are specialized towards distilling complex topics to ways that the public can understand them. This is usually because like people with journalist degrees or experts in think tanks have commercial incentives to make those topics as accessible as possible so that lots of people can read them and you can make more money in the articles that you generate. Specifically, when it comes to regulation, for instance, these people have to make these topics digestible. Otherwise, your regulators won't read them, and your think tank doesn't stay as relevant in the like think tank industry as it would with its competitors. Therefore, even if the topics around generative AI are really complicated, you have people whose literal jobs and degrees it is to distill those topics to ways that politicians can digest and therefore make the regulations for. Secondly, I think it's actually untrue that governments are old in all of the ways. That's to say, for instance, and I know this because I work in DFS in Kenya, for instance, but there, the general age of most Kenyan government leaders is around 40, but specifically in the Ministry of ICT, the average age is 25. This is to say that specific ministries that regulate specific sectors often call in people who are uniquely like drawn to those sectors. And when it comes to things like AI or innovative advancements, usually the people working in them generally tend to be younger because they're more proximate to and care about those issues. Therefore, I think, sure, Joe Biden might be really old, but people who regulate the specific ins and outs of AI probably are likely to have more knowledge and be more specialized to those things. Otherwise, they wouldn't have those posts in the first place. Not every government in the world is like a corrupt like oligopoly the way that like, I don't know, the US might be. Secondly, on safety, here they say bad people will use AI to make bombs. One, I think there's incentive for regular auditing when you have open source software. That's to say that you as a generative AI tech firm probably have incentives because, you know, the name of the AI is attached to your company to audit the code that's being made. And you probably have higher incentives to audit that code, and, you know, lots of people can access it and like make stuff from it. This is, say, for instance, that if you find back channels that are being made to siphon data away to bad actors, or like actors are using it to make deep fakes or whatever, you probably have incentives to siphon those things. Secondarily, you have more manpower to do those sorts of things, right? This is to say that individual people also care about their data being taken away, or like misinformation being used or spread throughout it, right? At the point at which lots of people have like political or social or interpersonal reasons to ensure that like their data is safer, or like bombs aren't being made. That means you just have far more manpower to make sure that those types of audits and checkings are taking place. Therefore, I think that like that sort of stuff is likely to reduce on that ground, probably far more accessible in a world in which more people can access those things than one in which you have to rely solely on the cybersecurity team of that tech firm. But thirdly, I think like if ISIL or like an authoritarian government does create its own rogue AI, most people are unlikely to use it because like I think most people don't actually like radical Islamic propaganda or like radical Russian propaganda, right? So like even if these models exist, OO can't prove to me that these models are likely to become so popular and so disseminated that everyone's going to use them and it's going to cause great amounts of harm in the world. Cool. 3 pushes from CG. Firstly, I think just on a principle ground, AI models that are based on data that's already public, i.e. most of the ways in which these generative AI like understand how to like make the fancy artworks or make like new lines of code or whatever are based on algorithmically sifting through user data. Therefore, universally the access to AI code is one that is principally sound because it's often trained on the public, and therefore access to its content should also be allowed for the public to have, especially given the fact that governments are often mandated to regulate public goods, i.e. land usage that can have externalities on other people is often mandated to be regulated by the government. Therefore, when people's data is being used to train these AI, or like artists' data is being used to train like musical AI, they probably have rights to access those things too. Second point, it prevents monopolization. I think why is monopolization unique in this world? As OG points out, developing new AI is very expensive, which means that a select few companies have access to the actual material resources and expertise needed to develop AI, which creates significant gaps between companies that are able to create it and integrate into their systems versus those that cannot. These companies can restrict their access to that code or the ability to use AI in specific businesses or use cases behind high paywalls. This is more likely than OO's idea that big companies will envelop small companies because, one, the small companies are unlikely to develop that AI anyway, but two, now all the smaller companies also have access to Google and OpenAI's code too. At the point at which there are probably more small startup firms than there are big firms, it's unlikely that big firms can envelop all of them or challenge them in being able to access the codes that they create. Why is monopolization specifically bad when it comes to AI? Because the AI is growing exponentially into things like business, governments, and education, right? So, but also content generation, i.e. social media, and influencers often use AI to make the specific message that they want to give to the world, which means that the levers of power and uniquely information in the world become increasingly concentrated into the hands of a few companies that have the power to control access to those generative models, i.e. large generative AI models today, both closed and open source currently, are developed predominantly by for-profit companies. These models, including like whatever approaches they have, like responsibility or ethics, are guided by those companies and their internal structures, which means these tools are inherently undemocratic in that tech players own and control their development. So if you're worried about things like control of information, I'll take you in 5 seconds, or inherent biases such as political biases or racism, open source AI uniquely democratizes those things. Yes.
When power is consolidated, it's also easier to fight against that power because you know where it is. That's why it's possible for the EU to sanction companies like Facebook, but it's not possible for them to sanction smaller companies that they don't know what do.
Sure, but I think the problem right now is at the point in which the EU can't access the codes and the ways in which those AIs algorithmically develop models, the biases built into them. It's just really difficult to point out which part to sanction or not. In our world, lots of experts can access these things and uniquely sift out where the issues lie, and therefore it makes those sanctions more targeted, more niche, and therefore more effective in controlling AI. So insofar as AI informs things like think tanks right now, in the control of big players, it probably means that the biases of generative AI are more towards pro-business, anti-equity, and stuff like that. This is undue power to tech companies. I also want to quickly talk about why innovation also gets better in our world. Firstly, because I think collaboration increases. Right now, we rely on the R&D of big firms, which is often limited by those firms' ability to conceptualize unique use cases. When you have more individuals, more companies, you exponentially increase the potential for AI to expand into unique and diverse sectors. An example of this, for instance, would be that language learning models right now are uniquely difficult to access by non-English speakers. And because they're uniquely difficult to access and only accessed by English speakers, it means that language learning models for smaller languages are very hard to develop. In a world in which is more open source, it means that people from different countries can create better language learning models, and they can apply their own expertise in their own languages and create AI models that are uniquely developed for them. But more access means cheaper products too, so more AI for everyone. On all those grounds, proud to propose.
Thank the member of government for that fine speech. And now to open the case for closing opposition, we welcome the member of opposition to the floor. Hear, hear.
Thank you. Okay. Few eyes audibly, please, because I can't look in chat at the same time, apparently. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to do a few very simple things that is going to help us take this debate from CEO. Firstly, I'm going to tell you why we get better and safer AI, actually mechanizing these points fully, bringing you unique extensions on privacy. And then I'm also going to, hopefully if I have time, bring you a unique extension about how we lose out on key integration or key innovations that happens via integrations with other firms. Laura will also mechanize that further in her speech. I think most of my rebuttal is going to be very well integrated as we're going to clash. Let's talk about why we're going to get better, safer AI on our side of the house. I think there are two key reasons that we can boil it down to. I'm going to actually mech these, which I don't think our opening fully manages to do. The first reason is privacy, which is an entirely unique argument. Please note that privacy is always at the top of the debates around generative AI. It is a key issue that we are concerned about now that we suddenly have machines that can effectively mimic and act like humans, taking what we consider to be inherent human qualities, such as our brains, our emotions, not our emotions, but our creativity, etc. There's also a key issue when it comes to how we regulate them. This is 100 times worse than someone stealing your data on social media, because these are people who can actually act check you, videos, etc. There are two ways in which this becomes better. I think A, you're able to control the legitimacy of the input on our side of the house. A code is built on, and the models that these generative AIs are built on, is built on data that is fed to it, but also the inputs from the users who use it. All of this is incredibly sensitive information. Everything you have ever asked a generative AI, meaning everything that this incredibly smart supercomputer knows about you. Just think about how much Google knows about you when it gives you targeted ads. Google is maybe half as powerful in this. If you've ever interacted with ChatGPT for more than a day, it knows so much about you. Things about your private self you probably do not want out there. If this code is available, it is not very hard to figure out its input that becomes available too. This means that we are at great risk, and on a government side, users' data will be exposed. This means that very private stuff can end up in anyone's hands without consent, and they can access your sensitive material. This is more than the Chinese government knowing what you scroll on TikTok at 3 a.m. This is someone knowing everything you've ever asked ChatGPT and thereby everything about you. Secondly, it also becomes harder to ensure that copyrighted material is not used as input in these machines. Feeding a solid AI model because you've stolen ChatGPT's years and years of research and development and taken this model, removed the guardrails, and then feeding it, for example, all of the Harry Potter books or Scarlett Johansson's voice means that you can effectively just take away someone's identity. It becomes significantly harder to regulate any of these good, and you can make a very, very good copy of it because you have all that research. It becomes significantly harder to regulate this on their side of the house if you cannot control this type of input. This brings me to my second point on regulation and security. Our opening talks about how, oh, we can get these models without guardrails. We can make bad deepfakes. I'm not entirely sure about
POI.
I'll take you in a second. I'm not entirely sure about the scale of harm here, considering deepfakes exist on both sides of the house. Let me talk to you about why it actually A, becomes less secure, but also B, why it becomes easier to regulate on our side, entirely new. Why is it less secure? I think the very simple thing here is it's much easier to hack something which you know the model of. If you think of a piece of line as like what a key goes inside, a lock, that's what that's called. If you can figure out the lock, you can basically create a mold of the key in reverse. This is how you hack something. It is the same logic that means that if I have your access to your Wi-Fi, I can hack into every single device that you have connected via Bluetooth. That, depending on how smart your home is, can mean anything from your video camera to literally your fridge. And I'm not a very super hacker person panel. This means that we're not just talking about building bad new AIs, but also hurting current AI models and everyone who uses these current AI models, posing an even further security issue, maximizing the impacts I've just given you on privacy. Why is it easier to regulate than on our side? I just want to point out very clearly here that you do not have to understand code to do regulations. You just have to say, I do not want this to happen to an AI, and then it is the job of the companies to regulate it. Most politicians don't understand the economy either. They go, I don't want inflation. And then smart people go, oh, here's how we don't get inflation. That's how politics works. This is not rocket science, people. I'll take you in a second. I'll ask for it. Thank you. We don't have to understand. You don't have to understand code. I think it's very simple here. It is much easier to regulate big firms as the US or the EU because they can wrestle with Google and ChatGPT. If you know what the problem is and where the problem is coming from, you can say, you cannot do this. We will not have it. It is a lot harder to access a bunch of random people in basements or a bunch of small companies because you do not know where they are and you do not know what they're doing, and they probably aren't listed companies. They probably do not have the same incentives as all of these big companies. It's harder to regulate. On our side, the key impact here is to understand that anyone who uses ChatGPT models will always have to play by the ChatGPT rules because they cannot access the basic model and change it. On a government side, anyone can change the rules and they can actually use this to hurt not only ChatGPT, but that. I think the impacts here are very clear. Privacy is destroyed. Anyone can access your information, but also there are consequences for like art, creative fields, etc. Before moving on, taking that POI from opening.
On your first extension, you train the AI model and adjust the weightings on data, but the code itself does not contain the data. This debate isn't about the training data, it's about the model.
I'm not sure that's entirely true, and regardless, I think that's spec-nodal. Secondly, AIs only become smarter because of what you feed it. If AI suddenly become really good at talking about the Harry Potter books, I can figure out that you've probably fed it the Harry Potter books. I think this is pretty simple analysis. Panel, let's talk about why this is so bad, and this is also going to take us over people on the innovation clash. What are the practical innovation harms? In status quo, the key innovations that actually happens via AI comes from integration that happens in partnerships with big companies. A big company goes, hey, we could use AI to make our lives and our work so much more efficient and do good for the world. What if we work together with ChatGPT to create a model of ChatGPT that we can use that fits our needs, but that runs on ChatGPT servers? Because guess what? It's really expensive to make your own AI. Companies don't want to do this. On government, good actors are less able to use AI due to the ripple effects of open source transparency. In status quo, companies utilize ChatGPT and generative AI's integrations to optimize their work. This looks like an accounting firm using a special generative AI model to spot fraud easier. I want to also point out here that integrations are add-ons that are cheaper, faster. They're not just like, I take your code and I take it away. It's run via ChatGPT, kind of like Google Maps or whatever. On government, these integrations are also open source. That means the codes and these models are freely available. This discourages companies from using them for three key reasons. Firstly, trade secrets. Companies have an incentive to protect their research and development. All companies have incentive to do this. Laura even makes the opening government admit this in a POI. Private companies don't want their secrets stolen. That's bad for business. Secondly, security reasons. Government firms or government contracted firms now cannot use this because this code will be vulnerable to compromise and attack semi-hacking mechanisms. Criminals can use these fraud detection software models to cheat better because they can use the key and lock thing to figure out how it's made and then cheat the system. And thirdly, it's a huge privacy risk for firms, their employees, their clients. It makes it less secure. We are discouraging key innovation. We cannot stand for this. So proud to stand on opposition.
Last second, I thank the member of opposition for that fine speech, and then to conclude the case for closing government, we welcome the government with hear, hear.
Hey, am I audible?
You are indeed.
All right, great. POI is only in the chat. Please don't unmute yourself. Okay, 1 second. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the girl math economists don't know math, economy, or computer science. The first thing to understand is that this open source code does not include something called personally identifiable information, which is where the privacy concerns necessarily come from. Privacy concerns come from you being able to receive information, files, and document that tell you what an individual or a group of individuals is like, what preferences they have, etc. None of this is revealed within open source code. This is just factual BS coming from closing opposition, because personally identifiable information is not contained in the lines of code. This is a regulation that is by law across the world, that codes cannot have personal identifiable information within it. Therefore, there is no change and no harm that is occurring to privacy. In fact, we argue that the companies that are powerful enough to use your data to show you adverts are already going to do so, and are going to do so even more so in your world, given the analysis coming from Sarim about how it is that you end up giving larger companies the power to monopolize and use this data in whatever way they like without seeing any kind of competition. Therefore, the ability for companies to violate your privacy and show you targeted ads is something that is significantly increased in a world in which the wealth and power is limited to those few companies. Then they said you can hack the code once you know what it is. That is also not how anything works. The first thing to understand is that hacking is prevented in a world by two things. One, by firewalls, and secondly, by digital encryption. Both of these things, we argue, are symmetric on both sides, and in fact are better off in our world, because now in our world, smaller companies can use artificial intelligence to improve the models of digital encryption that they have. They can use artificial intelligence to increase digital key rotation, which means that you can't access personal identifiable information, because now artificial intelligence is helping you as a smaller company rotate your keys and offer you greater digital information on how to exactly it is that you want to protect your data. Therefore, this idea that you can take a piece of code and hack is just untrue. But the second thing I'm going to talk about why that stuff is nonsense, I'm going to talk about generally in my clashes on security, right? The first thing to understand here, when it comes to data security and to artificial intelligence, and I think that's like the big debate here, especially within the opening half. The first thing to understand is extremely important for us to offer greater manpower when it comes to being able to monitor a particular open source code for vulnerabilities. This is extremely important because in the status quo, companies, even if they are large companies, have limited numbers of people, and more importantly, have limited people from limited numbers of backgrounds. This is extremely important because in order to monitor and discover vulnerabilities within an artificial intelligence code, you need large numbers of people from different perspectives and different backgrounds, from different levels, from different kinds of education, who can monitor and view the threats that exist within that code and inform the companies or inform the general public, because it's open source, that this particular vulnerability exists within this code and this code can be manipulated in XYZ way. You take away the inability for large numbers of experts from different backgrounds to do so once you don't make it open source. But the second thing is that if someone misuses it, you're far able to track what it is about the code that they were able to exploit and misuse, and therefore have far more expertise in being able to plug those vulnerabilities for the future. Thirdly, and extremely importantly here, this was a POI I asked, which was dismissed by opening opposition. They said security agents, the American government already has AI, so there's no delta over there. Sure, the American government might have AI, but large numbers of countries, especially third world countries, who, by the way, face the brunt of things like crime and terrorism, don't have the access to artificial intelligence that they could have otherwise used, or that they can use now in our world to improve their security mechanisms. In fact, we argue that it is extremely important for you to give this artificial intelligence code to security agencies so that they're able to buttress their security measures far more. This last thing that I want to argue within this is this bizarre idea that people are going to start committing more terrorism. But before I go on, I'll take opening.
All right. So you say that we're going to have more manpower after you pass the motion. But in the status quo, who has more manpower? Good actors like the American government and US companies, or bad actors like terrorist organizations?
Good listen, the argument about whether or not terrorism will increase is already significantly mitigated in a world by where I've told you that security agencies in our world will be able to combat terrorism far better once they have the artificial intelligence to be able to do so. But the second thing I'm going to talk about is going to respond to your POI even more directly. I think just structurally, given the nature of crime and terrorism on one hand, and the nature of security and protection and policing, etc. on the other, artificial intelligence can create a significant improvement delta in one and not the other, i.e. terrorism will not significantly exponentially increase in a world where those terrorists can use artificial intelligence, because your ability to, let's say, bomb a particular area or shoot a bunch of people is limited on things like your ability to access guns and weapons, none of which has anything to do with artificial intelligence whatsoever. However, your ability to police areas, to know, to be able to, let's say, detect terrorists from a particular area, etc., can be significantly improved by artificial intelligence, because you're able to, let's say, process people's data a lot more, process like the citizens of a neighborhood a lot more. You're able to quickly go through that data and see who's acting sus, etc. Therefore, your ability to protect yourself is far greater. The third thing that I'm going to talk about then is the second thing, rather, is about monopolization. This idea that, by the way, was never responded to by closing opposition. We told you that, one, smaller companies aren't being bought out in our world necessarily because smaller companies aren't coming up with that artificial intelligence code from scratch, because as every team in this house agrees, constructing artificial intelligence is a very expensive and difficult procedure. Secondly, I just don't think it's true that every single small company will just agree to being taken over by Google. I just don't know why that's necessarily true, right? But the important thing here is that all of the consequences of bigger companies having power is significantly magnified inside opposition's world, because you then become the only entities that have control over this information. I want to point out, as a response to the POI that was offered to Sarif, which was that the EU can regulate fewer companies a lot more easily because fewer companies are just numerically easier to regulate. I want to point out that if there are any company that has the agency to violate your privacy, or has whatever agency to use AI and do bad things, is presumably a company that is large enough to already be in the eye of government administrations and government regulators. But that, secondly, I already told you that less power means that you can offer more money to, let's say, politicians to lobby for pro-business regulation that benefits you, and therefore any instance in which a company is able to do bad things is, like I said, magnified inside opposition. This is also extremely important insofar as you end up giving fewer companies more power and more political control over the information that is proliferated within politics and within society. For example, if artificial intelligence is informing think tanks and informing government decisions, then having that power in only a few companies means that those companies can structurally code their personal preferences, like pro-business ideas, etc. And therefore, their ability to, let's say, lobby governments increases in a world where they're proliferating those kinds of ideas throughout society. We also talked about how it is important to recompense individuals for the fact that their data is being used. Very proud to propose.
Fantastic. We thank the government whip for that fine speech. And to conclude the case for closing opposition, to wrap up the opposition bench, and to conclude this debate as a whole, I welcome the opposition whip here.
I hope I'm audible. I take my POIs in the chat, please. I can promise you that ChatGPT knows every little inch of what my thesis is about because I ask it questions about it all the fucking time. Maybe I'm just stupid, but I think a lot of people like me use ChatGPT for everything in their life, or they use it for small things like, what should I cook for dinner? What should I wear to a party like this? What should I write in the next paragraph of this, given that I've already entered the first 50 pages of it and asked it to correct it, right? I think we feed it a lot more information than we're actually aware of. I might not necessarily give it a lot of sensitive information, but I could imagine a young teenager asking it questions about the world that it might not know how to get answers to in other places, or adult people asking like, is my wife actually cheating on me if she's doing these sorts of things? Like questions like that might not seem like super personal, but actually have a lot of access to your daily life and your knowledge. Why is it that ChatGPT is unable to answer questions about my thesis very correctly? That's because it sets up a frame, and I'm very sorry to add new characterizations to this. I was hoping the government bench would understand how machine learning works, but apparently that's not the case, so I'll have to do it. But it sets up up a frame that remembers my login, it remembers my details, it remembers literally everything I've ever told it because I ask it to remember those things in order for it to work for me, right? So when the POI is just like, oh, it doesn't have your privacy, or the CG whip or like government whip is just like, no, it's not by law, it's not legal. That is not analysis, and it is also not truth. Martha told me afterwards, she almost did the Roman thing, look me in the eyes, I know you're lying. And I know that government is lying on these parameters, right? Because literally that is how it works, because that is the only way that it can work. You might believe or want to believe that it doesn't use this within the code, right? But look, that is the only way for the code to work. That is literally how AI works in this case. What else does CG then say to our case on this? They tell you private, I already told you like machine learning, but also note the consistent updates or constant updates that it has to do on these things. So that just means that it has to update on the knowledge that it's being fed consistently. Second of all, on firewalls and encryptions. I don't have a firewall. I don't know if a lot of people do, but I don't have one, so I'm definitely exposed. I would assume a lot of other non-techie people also don't have one. And then they say encryption. Literally the whole debate that what they're defending is that this is supposed to be non-encrypted so that it is open source. Again, there is no metric on government side as to why this is not going to be permeating your privacy and like taking advantage of who you are as a person. Even if it is not likely for a lot of people to access these information, I think on a principle level it's unjust for us to defend a system that has access to that level of private information without any sort of insurance or security that this is not going to be violated or used against you in very negative ways. I have a lot of reasons as to why that's better on our side, but I'll return to that in a second. I just want to say very specifically here, I don't think that there's any adequate responses to these things. And I still think it's very violating of us. And I think the best case here is then that you don't have a lot of super personal information that you can tie to your personality, but you still have a lot of information about trends, what kind of questions people are asking. And I still think I should be able to ask these questions in the like privacy of my own home and the privacy of my own computer without people knowing these things and being able to use these things against me. Now, why is it that I would rather have a company like ChatGPT know these things or like have access to the knowledge? Because I want to note here that the delta in this debate is not necessarily does terrorists have AI or do they not have AI? Does security agencies have AI or do they not have AI? Literally everyone has AI. It is out in the world now. You could just get a ChatGPT integration. That is a delta here. Whether or not you're latched onto ChatGPT and you're using their services and softwares, whether you're using the Bing, whatever it's called, or whether you're independent of that and can separate yourself completely from these things. That means everyone has access to this ChatGPT. The difference is then, what are they able to see given that they have this access? And more specifically, what are they able to do given that they might know how, or like that they now know how the ChatGPT works, right? And I think it's on those parameters that we win this debate. Before moving on, like doing specifically what we do, let's talk more about the CG case overall. First of all, they tell you that you're going to have better audits on the principle or like on the simple premise that you have more audits. I think that's intuitively non-true, but I think it's also more possible to believe that if you have more people working in sort of like audits or like checking these things, there's an like huge marginal, like difference. So the more people you have, the more specific small things you're able to do versus if 10 companies have one person, that one person is probably looking for the same thing across 10 companies. Whereas if one company has 10 people, then all these 10 people will be doing different things. I think that also means that you get better audits on this side. Then they tell you stuff about less monopolization. I think I ask in a very direct POI why it is a monopolization of these kind of premises. Even if we call it that, I don't think that's what it is, but just calling it that to like play into their narratives, I think it's just very good because then you're actually able to talk to the people. And I think Martha talks about this in their regulation point, right? I think we do that better than our opening that just says, oh, regulation is very hard to do for these reasons. We tell you, yes, it's hard to do, but here's how you make it easier for these regulators to actually do it. When you don't need to know the cost, but you just need to identify the problem, which is possible on both sides of the house, independent of whether or not you know the code. But second of all, because you have access and knowledge about these people and the companies that they're running, right? That means you know the people of Meta, you see them all the time. They're always in your lobby asking you questions if you're in the EU. Like, look up Margrethe Vestager if you don't know her already, EU Commissioner of Competition, wonderful lady. But also just like knowing these people, knowing exactly how does these things work is what's going to make it significantly easier. And that's how we get better regulations. That's how we equip not just lawmakers, but also the public of understanding what is actually happening, because there are fewer people to regulate and everyone is latched onto them via integrations. That means you only have to regulate companies like ChatGPT. Everyone else that is then latched upon to ChatGPT automatically gets regulated and you're unable to like separate yourself from these things. No, thank you, non-audibly. Second of all, I think Martha does a good job in doing this significantly better than our opening, but I also think our privacy point is very clearly like separate from this, right? I think we do mechanize what they call like guardrails, but what else does our opening have? Sure, because of time, let's take opening, let's take OG.
Okay, so it's hard to regulate small firms on either side. They get better models with access to open source code, and we're more likely to get pro-social uses like research innovation because we have existing laws to prevent malpractice, and legal ventures are safer for investors.
I get it. But I don't think that's true because I think the small independent people also have access to AI on our side of the house via integrations. That's why I know a startup that's like, let's use ChatGPT to make studying easier, not because they have servers in their back rooms, but because they're just literally latching onto all the infrastructure that ChatGPT also already has, just building on a few extra additives, making it something new and exciting that they can use. You'd have the exact same amount of innovation on their side. But let's just clash this on innovation really quickly. That's what OG really wants to talk about, right? Because I think Martha also does a very good job at explaining to you how mutual dependencies work. Even if we make it a law that all these like software tech giant tech companies have to have open source, that doesn't necessarily mean that the accounting firm or the management company firm, or I study business so I can't name any other kind of firms, but these kind of firms necessarily have to have open source as well. They're maybe not legally able to like engage with this type of open sourceness. I don't know what to call it. And they might not necessarily be able to like engage with this kind of level because they have to protect the bias, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a huge loss on innovation and utility. And I think that's worse for the people overall, in the same way that I think like infringing on privacy is worse for people overall. I think actually we're kind of the only team that talks about the people and how this is massively impacting them. I think we managed to outweigh on just being like more specific, on having better metrics, but also we give better pathway to actual change rather than just saying bad actors. I don't think that manages to prove to you why bomb making is easier in a very exclusive level, but I do think we managed to prove to you why it is a privacy is infringed upon and why it is the regulations are much easier on our side of the house. CEO.
Thank Opposition Whip for that fine speech, and I invite all members of the debate to virtually cross the floor, shake hands, and get out of here.